So when was Jesus really born? Well, it's complicated, but we take a look at it in this episode of the Accessible Faith Project. Hi there, I'm John, and welcome to the Accessible Faith Project. If you're new here and looking for insights into the Bible, faith, and history in ways that will engage your brain regardless of your faith stance, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you can be notified anytime I upload a new video. Also, this video might raise some other questions that you might want me to address. Feel free to share those in the comments section below. There's a scene in the 1985 film Back to the Future where Doc Brown geeks out to Marty McFly about the time machine that he's just made. When talking about the possibilities of exploring history directly, one of the dates that he dials in is December 25th in the year 0, saying that he could travel back in time to witness the birth of Christ. And while this was done for entertainment value for an audience that wouldn't know otherwise, there's a couple problems with that date. The first is a purely practical one. In our common calendar, there is no year 0. Had Doc Brown actually tried to travel back to a year 0, he probably would have gotten lost in some space-time vortex and may have needed some assistance from a certain occupant of a blue police box. We use the convention of BC for before Christ and AD as Anno Domini, or the year of our Lord. It was first devised in the early 6th century, but it wouldn't be in widespread use until after 800. It would be further cemented with the adoption of the Gregorian calendar, which is now the widest dating system in the world. You may have noticed in most of my videos, I use the convention of BCE and CE for before Common Era and Common Era. And the reason that I use this is not out of political correctness, but out of the reality that Anno Domini is actually wrong. There's a number of things that we don't know about when Jesus was actually born, but ironically, one of the few things that we can say is that it is unlikely that Jesus was born in year 1. Well, how do we know this? Well, there's a couple of issues. Keep in mind that the two different birth stories of Jesus in the Bible are recorded in Matthew and Luke. Both of these Gospels were written more than 70 years after this event, so purely from a historian's perspective, one has to be careful. As devotional and inspirational stories, they are powerful and carry a great resonance, but that historical stuff? That's a bit trickier. Take Luke, for example. Luke places the birth of Jesus in the year of a census while Quirinius was governor of Syria, but also when Herod was king of Judea. But there's a bit of a problem with this. Herod the Great died at least 10 years before Quirinius became governor. Even if you factor in Herod's son, Herod Archelaus, Quirinius replaced him as the governing authority in Judea when Archelaus was banished to what is now Vienna in modern-day Austria. So Quirinius was never governor while a king named Herod was in power in Judea. Now, I don't fault the writer of Luke for this, but from a historical perspective, the writer of Luke was working with what information he had available, even if that information was not accurate. The writers of Luke and Matthew were focused on theological concerns rather than historical accuracy. Still, this doesn't really help us in narrowing down when Jesus was born. On the other hand, both Matthew and Luke independently associate the birth of Jesus with the reign of Herod the Great. As I mentioned before, Herod the Great died at least 10 years before Quirinius was governor of Syria. According to independent historical sources, Herod's death is associated with a lunar eclipse that happened just before Passover in a given year. Fortunately, something like this astrophysicists can calculate, and sure enough, there was a total lunar eclipse that was clearly visible in the region in March of 4 BCE, right before Passover. So if we are to use this as a key marker, then Jesus had to have been born before March of 4 BCE. Add in some variations allowing for other events associated with the birth of Jesus, that the most likely years for the birth of Jesus would be between 6 and 4 BCE. And even then, this might be a little too tight of a date range. Still, if Doc Brown dialed in the DeLorean to December 25th in any of these years, he wouldn't have seen anything there either. The truth is, we don't know what day of the year Jesus was truly born. The earliest estimation for the birth of Jesus is mentioned by Clement of Alexandria, who reports a date of May 20th in his commentary on the book of Daniel, and this was written in the late 2nd century. Now, he doesn't take credit for the date, but rather reports that his is something that contemporaries of his have calculated. Other sources identified other dates in and around the spring. On the other hand, in 200 CE, Hippolytus of Rome estimated that December 25th would be the birthday of Jesus. Well, from a historian's perspective, his method isn't accurate at all, but based on a concept that great individuals in history are conceived on the day of their death. Hippolytus at the time understood that Jesus was crucified on March 25th of the year, and therefore would have been conceived on that day of the year, so he simply counted off 9 months to get to December 25th. Simple, right? Well, yes, but in my own experience as a dad, 9 months is a guideline at best, but you work with what you've got. Still, Hippolytus's flawed assertion is the first written example of proposing December 25th as the birthday for Jesus, even if actual celebrations of it would not come for more than 100 years. From a historian's point of view, we genuinely don't know what day of the year Jesus was born. But both Clement and Hippolytus tell us a little bit of something else about when we celebrate the birth of Jesus. The date of Hippolytus's estimation throws a wrench into the assertion that Christmas was simply a Christianization of the Roman festival of De Natale Soli Invicti. We know through Roman historical sources that the birthday of the unconquered sun, which fell on what was then the winter solstice, December 25th, wasn't established as a festival until 274 CE, more than 70 years after Hippolytus of Rome's original estimate, but about 50 years before the first record of Christmas being celebrated. Chicken, meat, egg. What is true, however, is that the earliest celebrations of the birth of Jesus did not take place until 336 CE, and really didn't become widespread until the late 4th century. Christmas celebrations have a long and complicated history on their own that have taken on seasonal aspects of the cultures that adopted it. That, as I've often said, is worth another video. So what is the upshot of all this? Christmas as a celebration is not as old as we think it is, and we don't have an absolutely concrete date to when Jesus was born. Rather, it is safest to say that Jesus was born on a day between 6 and 4 BCE. So if somehow you get your hands on a flux capacitor, whatever you do, don't set it for year 0. What is perhaps more interesting is that the early church thrived without celebrating Christmas for more than 300 years. It didn't matter to early Christians when Jesus was born, only that he was born, and that was a much more important question. So if you want to explore questions like this in ways that will expand your horizons and deepen your understanding regardless of your faith stance, then come and join us on this journey by clicking on subscribe and that little bell icon, and you're all set to go. And I'll see you next time on the Accessible Faith Project.